turmoil. It has pervaded every aspect of Latrell Sprewell's life: his childhood, his basketball career, his relationships, his finances. It has followed him everywhere, shadowing him like a storm cloud, and fashioned him, over many years, into a vessel through which to carry out its sinister process of self-perpetuation. He was born into it, in Milwaukee, in a crime-infested sector of the city, into a family unit which, due to a pattern of physical abuse on the part of the patriarch, would find itself irreparably fractured by the time Latrell was 5. He stayed with his mother for several years before being jettisoned, as a 9-year-old, across Lake Michigan to live with his father in the dangerous and dilapidated Rust Belt city of Flint. A city which was, at that time, sliding into deep economic depression due to the stumbling American automotive industry and the collateral and rapid downsizing of the GM workforce. When Latrell was a sophomore in high school, his father, a small-time drug dealer, was sent to prison for possession of a sawed-off shotgun. Sprewell moved in with his paternal grandparents and finished out the school year in Flint. Just before the start of his junior year, he returned to Milwaukee to live with his mother. He enrolled at Washington High, a mostly black magnet school on the north side of the city. Up until that point, Sprewell had never played organized basketball, but he was a natural athlete and had, upon the weathered blacktops of Flint, developed something more than a basic understanding of the game. He enjoyed basketball and quickly became a regular at several of Milwaukee's parks: Lincoln, 29th Street, Sherman, dominating pickup games with his size, speed, and raw ability. In the latter part of his junior year, Sprewell was approached in a hallway by Jim Gordon, a teacher at Washington who was slated to take over as varsity basketball coach the following year. Intrigued by Sprewell's long arms and muscular 6'5" frame, Gordon convinced him to try out for the team in the fall. Sprewell had always been known as a troublemaker, a truant, but in organized basketball he found structure and discipline, and his behavior improved dramatically. In his only season of high school basketball, Sprewell averaged 21 points per game and led Washington to a 27-3 record and a district title. Still mostly unknown and far too raw for Division I, Sprewell enrolled at Three Rivers Community College in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. Sprewell continued to refine his game and, after 2 seasons at Three Rivers, was offered a scholarship to the University of Alabama. There he would team with future first-round draft picks Robert Horry, Jason Caffey, and James Robinson to form one of the best defensive teams in college basketball. Initially, Sprewell's role at Alabama was limited, but in time he earned a spot in the starting 5. Although known mostly as a defender, Sprewell averaged nearly 18 points per game as a senior. He was selected 24th overall by the Warriors in the 1992 NBA draft. Within a 5-year span, Sprewell had gone from never having played organized basketball to being a first-round NBA draft pick. His level of adjustment would never catch up to that of the expectations to which he so quickly became bound. Golden State's leading scorer and resident Dream Teamer, Chris Mullin, missed half of the 1992-93 season with a thumb injury, and Sprewell, ever fearless, immediately stepped up in his absence. He started 69 games and averaged 15.4 points and 1.6 steals per contest for the season. He was named to the All-Rookie second team and was considered by many to be the steal of the 1992 draft. Above all other things, Sprewell's game was predicated upon his spectacular athleticism. He was lightning fast and deceptively strong, and he played with a level of energy which can only be compared to that of Russell Westbrook. He flew around the court with heedless abandon, affecting to initiate the very chaos amid which he thrived. Because of his exceedingly late introduction to organized hoops, Sprewell's skills were raw and unpolished, and they remained largely so for the duration of his NBA career. His handle was messy, his jump shot was mechanical, his passes lacked crispness, more on that later, and his movements in general were spastic in nature. He moved more like a free safety than a shooting guard. It wasn't always pretty in the traditional basketball sense, but Latrell Sprewell's game was profoundly effective. He was the fastest guy in the league. He was freakishly athletic, uncontainable in transition. Upon contemplation of Sprewell's game, images of his signature, flying, two-handed fast break dunks irrepressibly come to mind. Sprewell was the ultimate slasher. He attacked the rim relentlessly, utilizing his ultra-quick first step to annihilate defenders, finishing his violent drives with contorted layups and thunderous dunks. His best weapon in the half-court was his pull-up jumper, and he developed a fairly reliable three-point shot over the course of his career. Sprewell was an excellent offensive player, but his game-changing defense is what made him special. He was as proficient in the passing lanes as he was on ball, and his tenacity was unrelenting and unmatched. Even as a rookie, Sprewell established himself as one of the NBA's truly elite perimeter defenders, a sudden and undeniable ascension to the ranks of Jordan, Pippen, and the Glove. In 1993, Golden State acquired first overall pick Chris Webber in a draft night trade. Their projected 1993-94 starting five was beyond formidable. Tim Hardaway, Sprewell, Mullen, Billy Owens, and Webber. The Warriors were loaded, and Sprewell was excited to be part of what seemed destined to be a special season. Then, in a devastating turn of events, both Hardaway and star sixth man and all-time underrated player Sarunas Marciulionis suffered season-ending injuries before the season began. Despite losing two of their best players, the Warriors went on to win 50 games. Sprewell was phenomenal. He averaged a team-leading 21 points a game to go along with 4.9 rebounds, 4.7 assists, and 2.2 steals. He was selected to his first All-Star team and named to both the All-NBA First Team and the All-Defensive First Team. With Michael Jordan having retired the previous summer, Latrell Sprewell was suddenly the best two-guard in basketball. Golden State's 1993-94 season was viewed from the outside as successful, but within the organization, significant turmoil had arisen, and it metastasized unbridled. One day at practice, Sprewell got into an argument with 6'7", 260-pound power forward Byron Houston, a Mike Tyson lookalike and one of the most physically intimidating players in NBA history. Before Houston realized what was happening, Sprewell unloaded 3 hard punches to his face. The fight lasted a full minute before it was finally broken up. Head coach Don Nelson had his shirt ripped in half trying to separate the two. Sprewell had shown flashes of volatility in the past, but this was the first instance in which it manifested physically and in front of the team. It was a sign of things to come. By the end of the 1993-94 season, the relationship between Don Nelson and Chris Webber had eroded to the point of irreparability. There were many contributing factors, including Nelson's insistence on playing the versatile Webber at center and Nelson's early season treatment of his star rookie, which Webber perceived as disrespectful. Ultimately, Warriors management was forced to decide between the two and, at the urging of ownership, they sided with Nelson. Webber was traded to Washington at the start of the 1994-95 season for Tom Gugliotta and 3 first-round draft picks. Additionally, Billy Owens, with whom Sprewell was close, was shipped to Miami in the offseason for Ronnie Cycli. Sprewell made clear his frustration with these developments by writing the jersey numbers of Webber and Owens on his sneakers throughout the season. In October of 1994, Sprewell's 4-year-old daughter was mauled by one of his pit bulls. Her right ear was completely severed from her head, and her face was scratched deeply, leaving her both physically and emotionally scarred for life. Sprewell's response? Quote, "Stuff happens." Furthermore, he stated his intention to keep the dog, if possible, and only had it put down, surely after much urging, on the 10th and final day of its mandatory quarantine. 1994-95 was a disaster. Despite the return of Hardaway, Golden State won just 26 games. Sprewell was named an All-Star for the second straight year and once again led the Warriors in scoring, but his numbers dropped slightly and across the board. Don Nelson quit midway through the season and was replaced by Bob Lanier. Shortly thereafter, Sprewell got into a fight with veteran forward Jerome Kersey at practice. Kersey reportedly got the best of him, and Sprewell stormed out of the practice facility. He returned 20 minutes later carrying a 2x4 and looking for Kersey. Fortunately, Sprewell's teammates were able to restrain him before he could make use of his barbaric and brutal implement. Furious, Sprewell once again left the facility, and on his way out claimed he was going to get his gun. Team officials were concerned enough that they quarantined Kersey in the locker room for 3 hours while they awaited their star player's potentially armed return. The Warriors handled the incident in-house, and everyone did their best to move on from what was an exceedingly disturbing encounter. Unfortunately, the terrifying manifestations of Sprewell's explosive nature had only just begun. Just prior to the start of the 1995-96 season, Sprewell was pulled over in Oakland for speeding. The officer who pulled him over was of Japanese descent, and Sprewell allegedly bombarded him with racial epithets and slurs. After the officer arrested Sprewell on an outstanding warrant, Sprewell allegedly told him, quote, "People get shot out here. You could get shot real easy." Despite this alleged threat, the Oakland PD declined to file charges due to lack of credibility and immediacy. Rick Adelman took over as Warriors head coach for the 1995-96 season. The team won just 36 games and missed the playoffs for the second straight year. Sprewell began to grow frustrated and his play suffered. For the first time since his rookie season, his scoring average dipped below 20 points per game, and he was omitted from the All-Star team. Warriors management had promised Sprewell they would build a contender around him, but they had done just the opposite. They traded away Weber and Owens and left Sprewell with an aging and injury-riddled roster. Then, in the middle of the 1995-96 season, Tim Hardaway was dealt to Miami. The franchise was in shambles. Sprewell began to skip practices and team meetings, occasionally going completely off the radar, to the point where his coaches, frustrated and desperate, were forced to reach out to their missing superstar through the media. 1996-97 would be Rick Adelman's last season in Golden State. The Warriors won just 30 games and once again missed the playoffs. Without Hardaway, who had been the team's second leading scorer, Sprewell took on a heavy usage role as Adelman's lead playmaker and unquestioned number one option. He averaged career best in both points, 24.1, and assists, 6.3, and was named an All-Star for the third time in 4 years. But despite his success on an individual level, Sprewell remained overtly unhappy with the losing culture which had come to characterize this once promising franchise. Immediately following the season, Chris Mullin was traded to Indiana, and Rick Adelman, after going just 66 and 98 in 2 seasons with the Warriors, was fired. He was replaced by PJ Carlesimo. By the time the 1997-98 season started, Sprewell was the only remaining member of the 1993-94 team, the last Warriors team to make the playoffs. Golden State's roster had been completely dismantled before his eyes, and his frustration at this point was palpable. Prior to the start of the season, he announced that he would no longer be speaking to the media. The entire situation was a disaster from day one. Carlesimo and Sprewell hated each other, and everyone knew it. Carlesimo was a strict authoritarian, an old-school hard-ass. Described as a screamer, he was notoriously rough on his players, berating and belittling them loudly and hoarsely on a regular basis. He barked his demands gratingly between curses and insults, treating grown men like children. He was harsh and intolerant. He was verbally abusive. In a word, he was annoying. How anyone thought he and the ever-volatile Sprewell could possibly coexist is beyond comprehension. Within the first 2 weeks of the season, Sprewell had already skipped practices and missed flights. Golden State began the year 0-9, and after losses, it was later reported, Sprewell would gleefully and loudly criticize the decisions of the coaching staff. He came off as joyful in the wake of defeats, as if he felt vindicated in his displeasure. His arguments with Carlesimo got worse. During a lopsided early season loss to the Lakers, Carlesimo noticed Sprewell smiling and laughing in the huddle. When he told Sprewell to, quote, "get serious," Sprewell responded by telling Carlesimo, quote, "you're a fucking joke." It should have been clear that a major confrontation was brewing. The situation had become volcanic, and it was only a matter of time before it erupted. Entering December of 1997, the Warriors were 1-13. It was the worst start in franchise history. On December 1st, the team held a practice at their facility in downtown Oakland. They were running a 3-man 2-ball passing drill. It was Sprewell, Muggsy Bogues, and an assistant coach. Bogues was the shooter and Sprewell was the passer. Carlesimo, who had been observing the drill, voiced his dissatisfaction with Sprewell's passes, telling his star, quote, "make your passes crisper, put some mustard on it." When Sprewell blatantly ignored Carlesimo's input, Carlesimo decided to kick him out of practice. Suddenly, Sprewell charged Carlesimo and put 2 hands around his neck, telling him, quote, "I'll kill you." Carlesimo replied by saying, quote, "do it." After about 10 seconds, Sprewell was pried away from his coach. He kicked over a jug of water, ran upstairs to the team office, demanded a trade, and then stormed out of the practice facility. 15 minutes later, Sprewell returned. He darted past teammates and assistant coaches on a beeline to Carlissimo. Without hesitation, he landed a right hook to the side of the head coach's head. Once again, his teammates pulled him away. Having lost a flip-flop during the scuffle, Sprewell, looking somewhat ridiculous, yelled, to no one in particular, "Give me back my damn shoe," before barreling out of the facility once again. Following the incident, Commissioner David Stern banned Sprewell from the NBA for 1 year. It was the longest non-drug-related suspension in NBA history. Golden State voided Sprewell's $23.7 million contract, and Converse, with whom Sprewell had a massive endorsement deal and a signature shoe, promptly severed ties with its most high-profile athlete. Eventually, after taking his case to arbitration, Sprewell had the voiding of his contract overturned, but he was still suspended without pay for the remaining 68 games of the 1997-98 season. He returned home to Milwaukee and spent a year playing YMCA pickup ball and driveway horse with his younger cousins. While serving his suspension, Sprewell caused a high-speed accident in which 2 people were injured. He was charged with reckless driving and placed under house arrest for 3 months. The NBA lockout began in July of 1998 and was not resolved until the following January. On January 19th, just prior to the start of the lockout-shortened season, the Warriors traded Sprewell, now unbanned, to the New York Knicks for John Starks, Chris Mills, and Terry Cummings. In his first game as a Knick, Sprewell scored 24 points. New York suited him, and he meshed perfectly with the Knicks' core of Patrick Ewing, Allen Houston, and Larry Johnson. He finished the truncated season second on the team in scoring with an average of 16.4 points per game. The Knicks entered the playoffs as the number 8 seed in the East, but they fought their way to the NBA Finals, becoming the first ever 8th-seeded team to do so. Sprewell upped his scoring average to 20 points per game in the playoffs, and emerged, after Patrick Ewing tore his Achilles in the conference finals, as the team's on-court leader. The Knicks lost to San Antonio in the 1999 finals, but Sprewell's impact was undeniable. He spent 4 more seasons in New York, averaging 18 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. The Knicks made the playoffs in 2000 and 2001, losing in the conference finals in the first round, respectively. Sprewell was named an All-Star for the 4th and final time in 2001. Thanks to his strong play and relatively good behavior, the Knicks signed Sprewell to a 5-year, $62 million contract extension. Amazingly, he had bounced back from the Carlissimo incident and resurrected his career in New York. For the first time in years, turmoil was absent from Latrell Sprewell's life. It was, however, but a matter of time before it would reappear. Sprewell showed up to training camp in 2002 with a broken hand. He had neglected to inform the Knicks of his injury, and because of this, the team fined him an NBA record $250,000. He claimed to have broken his hand after a fall on his yacht, named Milwaukee's Best, more on that later, but it was widely reported that it had been broken during a fight. Sprewell sued the New York Post for printing this claim, but he ultimately lost in court. The relationship between Sprewell and the Knicks had soured. He was still a fan favorite, but the Knicks had missed the playoffs for 2 straight seasons, and management wanted change. He was shipped to Minnesota in the offseason for Keith Van Horn, who the Knicks received from Philadelphia as part of a massive 4-team deal which also saw Terrell Brandon shipped to the Hawks and Glenn Robinson to the Sixers. Van Horn would appear in just 47 games for the Knicks before being dealt to Milwaukee for Tim Thomas. Sprewell's first season in Minnesota was a resounding success. He averaged 16.4 points per game, teaming with Kevin Garnett and Sam Cassell to form the highest-scoring trio in the NBA. The Timberwolves went 58-24 that season and landed the number 1 seed in the West. Behind Garnett's overall magnificence and Sprewell's 19.9 points per game and swarming defense, they advanced to the Western Conference Finals where they faced the Lakers. Sprewell played well, but he was outdueled by Kobe Bryant, and the Lakers won the series in 6 games. Despite its disappointing end, 2003-2004 remains by far the greatest season in Timberwolves franchise history. Prior to the start of the 2004-2005 season, the Timberwolves offered Sprewell a 3-year, $21 million contract extension. Sprewell, insulted by Minnesota's offer, declined the extension, claiming, infamously, quote, "I have a family to feed." The 2004-2005 season would be Sprewell's last in Minnesota and his last in the NBA. He averaged a career-low 12.8 points per game, and the Timberwolves missed the playoffs. At this point, the market for Sprewell had dwindled. There was some interest in the summer of 2005, but nobody was willing to pay him more than the NBA minimum. Sprewell, of course, felt he was deserving of more. He held out, waiting for something better to come along. It never did. He was 34 years old, and his life as a basketball player was over. He finished his career with averages of 18.8 points, 4.1 rebounds, 4 assists, and 1.4 steals per game. In 2007, Sprewell was sued for $200 million by the mother of his 4 children. She alleged physical abuse and claimed that by turning down Minnesota's $21 million offer and subsequently ending their relationship, he had failed to support her and the kids as he'd agreed to do. Ultimately, he was barred from seeing his children. He had also been accused of domestic abuse in 2006, and it led to a 90-minute standoff with police before he was finally taken into custody, but those charges were eventually dropped. In 2007, his 70-foot, $1.5 million yacht, Milwaukee's Best, which he had once run aground on Lake Michigan, and upon which, it was alleged in 2005, he had choked a woman during sex, he was later acquitted, was seized and repossessed due to non-payment. Soon after, both of his mansions were foreclosed upon. By 2011, he was the #1 delinquent taxpayer in the state of Wisconsin. In 2013, he was arrested and jailed for disorderly conduct after refusing to turn down the music he was blasting out of his rented apartment. We'll never see another Latrell Sprewell. Today's incoming NBA players are poised, polished, and politically correct. They emerge from years of immense scrutiny, saying and doing the safe and proper. A player with Sprewell's tendencies and temperament would never survive the scrupulously risk-averse scouting process of the present day. He was emotionally raw, breathtakingly athletic, terrifyingly unpredictable, and magnetically drawn toward chaos. He was the embodiment of mayhem. He was turmoil incarnate.